Hey.
We're here with Mia and Brett. We're the Black Americans in New York, and we're up here on the roof with Brooklyn behind us. I'm really excited for this one. So Mia and I were talking in the car a little bit, and I wrote down some stuff that I wanted to start with and talk about, and we can kind of like go from there.
Okay.
If that's cool with y'all?
Yeah.
Cool. So we were talking about Black social media and frauds, and I wrote down hate platforms because Nia was saying how a lot of people now have noticed that saying certain types of inflammatory, I guess you could say, comments, and even sort of spreading stuff around without even necessarily knowing if it's true, if it's false, just like saying stuff just to get like attention and to like make their platforms like even bigger is kind of becoming like a thing and like an epidemic. And I also feel like I feel like this is just in general mainstream, but I feel like I do see it a lot with Black platforms. So I wanted to start there, know what you guys thought about that.
Well, I mean, I feel like a lot of people who are in Black media right now, they don't necessarily like belong to our culture. A lot of times they belong to other cultures, and they put out a lot of false narratives, or they share a lot of like negative image about who we are. But I mean, it doesn't represent who we are, but it maybe represents a small percentage of what Black Americans are like, and they kind of push that out in the front, and that's something that I see when you think about like World Star Hip Hop.
Right.
I know that person who like was the founder of World Star Hip Hop wasn't from here. He was from somewhere else. I'm not sure where he was from, but that's something that you definitely see.
Right.
Yeah, to piggyback off what he said, also like with the Shade Room as well, isn't the Shade Room owned by someone who's from another country?
Yeah.
And outside of blogs, just social media in general, because I was talking with Sturen in the car about watching YouTube grow to like where it's at now, and people aren't experts in what they're talking about, and they're given information but they don't provide references or links so you can look for yourself.
Context.
And yes, and that's why I like Seren's platform, because she does give links and encourage her viewers to look it up and don't take it for face value. But yeah, it's just a lot of people online saying anything, because you pretty much could be whoever you want. So it's hard to find people who are legit into what they're supposed to be promoting, quote unquote. And I just have a huge problem with that. That's one of my pet peeves. And there's a lot of people who are easily malleable. So if they will watch someone's video and think that is the truth and then quote it verbatim, like if they have a conversation with somebody, it's like, do you have an original thought? You just spewing what you heard on or what you saw online, you know? So that's like one of my gripes.
I sort of have a question. How do you think that people that are not, so like Black people that are not necessarily like Black Americans, got into these positions, which you can be like, I don't know, it's up to you, got into these positions of like sort of power, I guess, on these kind of like platforms or like on media or like on social media? Because I definitely agree with you, Brett, that you have people that are not a part of our culture that feel like they have such this big say, and not even just that they have this big say, but even like that they are dominating, like that they're dominating the quote unquote culture, dominating the narrative. Like, just, this is gonna sound random, but like just the other day I was on Instagram and I seen like a rapper who's like a Black American leave a comment on like another rapper's page, and it was like a bunch of snake emojis, which means like slime. It means like slime or like super slimy, like friend, like hard, whatever. And it was like all these people that was underneath it, like, what you trying to say? You try to say he's a snake? You try to say this? You try to say that? And I was like looking, I would like go to look on that person's like profile, and the majority of the people that was like saying that, they were not, a lot of them were Black, but they had like a flag or like London or like this or that. So it's just like, maybe the social media and the internet making like everything so much smaller, because it's just like, you're not a part of our culture, you don't know like what this like slang terminology even kind of means, and you see it and you like the music or you like the rapper or whatever, so you feel like you are a part of it, or even like you Black and they Black, so you feel like you're a part of it, but then you're confused, and then you're almost like making up this narrative of like, oh, he's calling you a snake, oh, it's beef, da 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 da. And I'm just like, No, that's not even what that means. So like, how do you guys think that even these like other types of people kind of even get into these like positions of thinking that they have a say and even getting a say and getting a voice sort of in our culture?
I feel like thank you. I feel like our culture as Black Americans, although a lot of people like to say we don't have a culture, we do have a culture. Our culture is like world culture and popular culture. So I feel like it's up for grabs. You know, like it's up for grabs. Everybody feel like they can be an expert on it without actually being in it, born in it, raised in it.
Everybody's
and I feel like that's the problematic. That's problematic to me because I like traveling and I observe other cultures, but I don't try to perpetrate and pretend that I'm Caribbean or anything. You know, I go as an observant and, you know, I can appreciate.
Like a visitor.
Yeah, as a visitor, you know. But I never try to take their slang and use their slang and pretend that, you know, I'm a part of it. So when I see stuff like that, it's like, wow, you know, it's just, I'm not shocked anymore, honestly. Mm-hmm. I think, in my opinion, I feel like that's why I feel like your platform is important, and anyone else who's doing something to preserve our history is important, because if you let other people tell it, we don't have a culture, we don't have anything going on. Mm-hmm. So that's my 2 cents on it.
I mean, I think people think our culture is very entertaining, but they don't necessarily take it serious. So when they put out a false narrative about Black people or Black people who are in the United States, they can easily just say or put out whatever. You know, if it's disrespectful, they don't really have a regard. And then when you ask about how to get into this position of power, because like they don't mind pushing it out there. I think someone like me or you would be like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to exploit my culture. I'm not going to sell us out because you're like conscious. You're conscious of or you're aware of that. Maybe they don't necessarily care. It's like, listen, I'm gonna get a check.
Yeah, because they're not one of us.
So they don't even feel disrespected, or they're just like, well, you know, that's not really my people. So, you know, I'm talking about them. That doesn't represent me, and that's probably why they get into those positions, because they go for it. Mm-hmm. You know,
it's funny because when we were in a car here, we were talking about traveling, and we've also done like some chit chatting about traveling on Instagram and in the DMs and stuff like that. We were talking about like traveling and like seeing different places, and especially different types of Black people. Like Nia was just in Bermuda.
I was there too, 2 years ago.
Oh really?
Definitely.
Yeah. So I'm the odd man out. I've never been to Bermuda.
Well, Barbados.
Barbados. Oh right, you said you didn't go to Bermuda.
I want to.
You want to go, and your ex-boyfriend didn't want to take you.
Yes.
Right. Exactly.
He's from there.
And he's from there. My bad. But I went on a cruise last year, and that was like my first time really even like going to the Caribbean. But I've done like a lot of traveling, like abroad and also like here in the U.S. And I do think it's really interesting to sort of see, not just like even amongst like Black Americans, seeing like the different types of like regional like differences in culture and things of that nature, and then seeing amongst different types of Black people, like ethnicity wise, how things are different. We were talking about how Miami, like I used to live in Miami, and I was like, something that was really hard for me when I was in Miami was like the culture shock, because there's like a lot of white Cubans in Miami, and they run shit, like they run everything, and it's like they don't like Haitians and they don't like Black Americans. If there's like a lot of racial tension in Florida and in South Florida between like Black people and white people and like other types of people in general, but like especially in Miami where there's like a lot of white Cubans, it's like the reason why they specifically don't like Haitians and Black Americans is because we don't speak their language. So it's like if you're Black but you're from Central America, you're from South America, if you're Panamanian, if you're Nicaraguan, and you could speak Spanish, it's kind of like you don't bother them as much, because it's kind of almost like you part of their shared culture, because like they say that like Hispanic, Latinx is like an ethnicity, they have like a shared language and it's certain types of things that they share. So it's almost like even though they might be of a different race, they're still more willing to like embrace them. We were talking about jobs, for example. The majority of like the jobs in South Florida, you have to be bilingual, like you have to speak Spanish. So it's like if you don't speak Spanish, you asked out, like you're the odd person out. And in that kind of way, it's wild too, because you might even find yourself in a situation as like a Black American or like again like a Haitian, somebody that doesn't speak Spanish, where I don't speak Spanish either, like I understand like the boat that you're in, and then you might have like a Black like Central American that speak Spanish, and they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have a problem. And that's just getting into more conversations about like sort of culture, like cultural enclaves and ethnicity, and the way that things are different. Even though we're all black in terms of like race, like we are all part of like the black race, but we have different cultures, we have different ethnicities, we have different languages. So I'll just read you a little bit. The Port Royal Experiment was a program begun during the American Civil War in which former slaves successfully worked on the land abandoned by planters. In 1861, the Union liberated the Sea Islands off the coast of South Carolina and their main harbor, Port Royal. The white residents fled, leaving behind 10,000 black slaves. Several organizations stepped in, and the result was a model of what Reconstruction could have been like. The black Americans demonstrated their ability to work the land efficiently and live independently of white control. They assigned themselves daily tasks for cotton growing and spent their extra time cultivating their own crops, fishing and hunting. By selling their surplus crops, the locals acquired small amounts of property. So they basically bought the land from the government, and they continued living there, and they became self-sustaining. And that was sort of like the birth of the Gullah Geechee culture in South Carolina that we know today. And what Brett said was, I have deep roots in James Island, South Carolina, and this is why so much of the history and culture has been preserved. So Brett said his great-great-great-grandfather, born in 1834, acquired 21 acres of land and was able to pass that on for generations. Like, that's amazing.
That is.
Yeah. I found that out when I went to San Diego. My older brother was in San Diego, and my grandmother had a first cousin who she grew up with on James Island, and he was living in San Diego as well. So we went to go visit him. He's like an elder of the family because essentially that's my grandmother's first cousin. And I was asking him about Cuffy Brown, his father, and Cuffy Brown is my great-great-grandfather. And so I also found out that there were records of Cuffy Brown's father, and it was talk that he was a slave. So I asked my cousin in San Diego, he's about 83 years old.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so he's up there. And he was saying that that was Daniel's land. Daniel Brown, who was the former slave born in 1834. And he said he had 21 acres of land. I thought it was like maybe 13 or 14. I didn't realize how much land he owned at the time. Mm-hmm. And yeah, he was like, it was 21 acres, and you know, they've been able to pass that land on for generations. So people who, that might be about 4 or 5 generations. Mm-hmm. And people who are in my generation right now still live there till this day.
Wow.
So a lot of the family are still there. A lot of them do own land, and it's like, all the neighboring families as well own a lot of land there too. And the reason why, like, I brought up James Island, even though that's not in Port Royal, like all of the Sea Islands have that similar story, mm-hmm. where a lot of black people were able to acquire land, whether they worked for it or they bought it. You know, it was theirs, and it was theirs to keep, and you know, they did remarkable things on it.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say that that's amazing because now with the Sealand Islands, there was like a lot of community land shareage, mm-hmm. and a lot of generations, people now are going back, selling the land to developers.
You were saying
so it's a lot of gentrification and developing going on that land, but there's a lot of people who are refusing to sell, and I'm so glad to hear that your family did not sell.
So,
like, that's
no. So some family members did sell, which is unfortunate. We do have some, because like my grandmother's mother and some of her siblings.
I was gonna ask, how did your sort of immediate family get to New York? Is that
right? So I mean, all my grandparents are from the South, so 4 different places in the South. So we got Montgomery, Alabama, Charleston, South Carolina, or James Island, which is in Charleston County, Coleraine, North Carolina, and Decatur, Georgia. So my family's literally from the South. Mm-hmm. And anyways, but a lot of people who moved to New York, they didn't really see the value or don't understand the value in the land. So some people have sold it. Some people down there, like say if an elder dies and his family members don't want it, maybe they moved away from James Island, so they probably sold it too. So there's a lot of gentrification going on down there, and it's kind of disgusting when you think about it, because it's not just like within my family, it's within a lot of people's, you know, family. Their land is being taken away from them, which is really unfortunate. And you know, so much history is there, and if like if you take their land, the history goes with it, even though it's a fading culture, because you know they were taught to not like accept it. Mm-hmm. Because think of a person who speaks Gullah or speaks Geechee. comes to New York and everybody's like, why do you sound that way? You sound different. So they told him to reject a lot of their culture because it was thought of as slave culture. Because that's like the closest cultural connection to any Western African culture. So a lot of them like kind of, you know, they just don't have the respect and the pride.
Right.
So along with that, that probably caused a lot of gentrification there.
Yes.
Definitely.
It's wild to me because I feel like, and I loved when you like hit me up and we were talking about it, because I feel like that happens a lot of, like, we have our own different cultural sort of enclaves and Black Americans,
beautiful.
and it's beautiful.
Yeah.
And like, I'm from DC, and it's like, DC is just like, the gentrification in DC right now is through the roof.
It's
like,
no longer Chocolate City,
it's
right?
no longer Chocolate City. It's no. It's, I don't know if it's
my mom was born in DC, and I have some family members there still. I gotta explore, but it's definitely different. Yeah, my great grandmother lived on Florida Avenue. I forgot the cross street, but my mom would tell me stories about it. But as both of you guys were saying, it's very. I feel like culture is pride. Like, culture is everything, and if you let your culture go, you don't have anything, or you become absorbed in the mainstream. And it's okay to adapt if you want to work. Okay, you have to follow the rules if you're in the workforce, but keeping your culture alive is something that's very important, because it's your history, you know, your lineage, and it's nothing to be ashamed of. And especially like the way we talk, regionalism with African and Black Americans, like, we have different slang, different depending on where you're at in the country, and I think it's beautiful, even though people look down on it and say, oh, you sound uneducated, it's Ebonics, it's our own dialect. It's beautiful.
Yeah.
You know what's so funny? Like, my mom, she's an educator in nursing, and she works at Montefiore Hospital. And a woman, she was talking to a woman about like going to Maryland, I think, or I think it was Virginia actually, and she was saying, they were talking about this restaurant. It's called the Scrimp Shack. And the lady who she was talking to was a Jamaican woman, and she said, why would somebody call something the Scrimp Shack? Right? And culturally, depending on where you're from, you know, you refer to shrimp as scrimps. And that's
so
like normal, and like
poisoning.
and that's like a part of the way we talk.
Right.
Yeah.
And to her, it's just like, why would you talk like that? And my mom had to educate her and say, like, you know, we have our own vernacular, and that's just how we grew up saying shrimp.
Right.
And that's a representation. Like, that restaurant is sort of keeping the culture going, because a lot of people don't know that you refer to shrimp as shrimp. Especially if you're born like in my generation. I'm born 1996, so a lot of people who are my age don't necessarily like didn't get that cultural connection. Maybe they don't remember, but maybe they don't have parents who were there to actually teach them about their culture, or maybe they don't have that same family dynamic that I have.
Yeah, because the elders will definitely teach you that.
Yeah, and I've been down south so many times, so I've gotten that. That made me culturally grounded, I would say. And a lot of people up here in New York might not have gotten that. Or people who aren't really from, like, if their parents are from a different country, they don't understand like the vernacular of the black English.
Yes, we've talked about this a little bit also. I feel like in terms of region and like how location matters and that type of thing, where you're growing up. Like, if you're growing up in, say, like New York, I do think it can, as like a Black American, depending on where you live, maybe if you live in Harlem, it's a little different. You know, if you live in certain types of places, it's like, depending on where you live, like if you live somewhere in New York, which does like embody a lot of melting pot culture, you maybe won't get that, I don't know, Black American experience.
Yeah, it depends on your elders, because I'm from Harlem, right? But my grandmother was from South Carolina. My dad's side of the family is from Alabama, and my grandmother passed away 4 years ago. But I missed, well, my mom's side, my father's mother's still alive. I miss talking with her because she was unapologetically country. Like like the words she used, like I use it sometimes. Sometimes when I talk, it come out in me. But now I see how important that was, you know, because a lot of people don't have that, and. She was really in the culture, and although my cousins and I, we were born here in New York City, I felt very blessed to have a grandparent that was still alive from the South that I grew up with, because I learned so much about what she went through during that time in the 40s and the 50s and her words. And it's like a totally different experience, and it was like having a real life time machine. And that's why, you know, I learned the words and stuff like that. But what you were saying, if kids nowadays, if they don't have that connection, they won't know, because New York City is pretty much a melting pot, and all other ethnic groups have enclaves except for Black Americans. It used to be Harlem, but it's really gentrified. You know, all other ethnic groups have their enclaves, but like just Black American, no. Maybe like middle class if you go to the suburbs and stuff, but classism is a whole nother different thing, because you conduct yourself according to your class as well. But having that Southern, you know, grandparents, I feel like it's a beautiful thing.
What's interesting is like being a Black American, being a real Black American. Like my family's from here and have been here for so many generations, right?
Like, and then people be like, we don't have no culture.
That is just ignorance, because at the end of the day, we have many different dialects, and you know, you have the dialect in New Orleans, you have the Black dialect in you know, South Carolina, the Gullah and the Geechee dialect. You have I was reading about the Seminole English, and that's like a Creole-based English. It's sort of like Gullah, but it was more so prominent like in Florida, and then somehow it migrated out west towards the Midwest. So like there are so many, you know, different vernaculars and dialects that we have that's a part of our culture.
Yes.
Even the cuisine, because region to region cuisine is different, just based on like the crops that were available.
Exactly.
So like, you know, if you are on the southeast part of like the South, or like, you know, Miami, if you're from Miami going up to like maybe North Carolina, at the tip of North Carolina, you eat a lot of soul food. I mean, I'm sorry, you eat a lot of seafood. Because you're right by the sea. But if you're inland more, you probably, you know, eat more meat, and you probably like enjoy barbecue more. It's like, well, that's just American stuff.
Yes, and I think that's a part of it too. It's kind of like, so America is like superpower, global superpower, which it became on the back of American chattel slavery, because basically you had centuries, literal centuries of free labor, right? So you had like your economy getting like built up and built up and built up. You had your city, your actual physical infrastructure, like buildings, especially like in DC, like the Capitol building. Like you have buildings that are still up like today that were built with slave labor. And then again, like yes, aside from like physical actual infrastructure, you also had economy that was being built. You had like money that was like flowing out, but you don't have to put anything back in, because you don't have to pay anybody anything, because they're slaves, like it's slave labor. And so it's like America was just getting ahead for centuries, which is why it's even a superpower now to this day. And then it's kind of like, it's like everything that really built America was based off of American chattel slavery. And then it's almost like once American chattel slavery ended, got abolished, like our culture kept things moving, because then you had like Black Americans that started like really like powering like the music scene, and like the blues and the jazz and the rock and roll and all this stuff that and now like hip hop, all this stuff that becomes like global, like worldwide culture, you know,
because it's so good, like you can't deny the brilliance.
You know what's so funny? I was in the living room with my sister and her friend, right? And you know, my sister asked this girl, because both her parents are from Jamaica, but she's born here. And you know, they're really good friends. They've been friends for a long time. And the conversation sort of got on like, what is Black American culture? Like, what's your culture?
What is it? Yeah.
Have one. And I asked her, I said, what are the elements of culture? All right, and we named some. We said food, we said music, we said dialects, we said art, right? Just all of it, you know what I'm saying? And I started breaking it down to her, and I said, you know, we do have a culture. It's unfortunate that you're not, you know, educated on it. And normally I don't really address ignorance, because if someone says something like that to me, I'm just gonna like kind of, you know, just walk away. Like, if you choose to be that ignorant, that's okay. That's on you. But you're sitting in my house, so now it's time for, you know, to get this game.
Education.
Because if you're not going to sit on my couch, right?
And tell me I don't have culture in my own house.
Right. And it wasn't nothing hostile, but she just really didn't know. Because, you know, her parents didn't tell her about that, and are they supposed to? Are they expected to?
And it becomes American culture. It's sort of like, it's sort of like, for example, you might say to somebody like, I don't know, macaroni and cheese is Black American culture, right? Soul food. And they might say, no, that's Southern food. It's just Southern culture. Like, white people eat that stuff too. Like, what makes it Black American?
But who was cooking it for their ancestors?
How did it get into the home of the white Southern person, you know?
What's interesting is, like, you have soul food and you have Southern food, right? And I've been to a white Southern restaurant.
Yep.
And that catfish was unseasoned. The yams was not, it didn't have brown sugar in it.
It was sitting
no,
there
no
bad.
nutmeg or anything like that.
It was bland.
So, I mean, yes, you have Southern food, but when you talk about soul food, what makes it soulful is the love that goes into it. It's the time.
It's like, again, now that America has become this global superpower, the #1 export of America is culture. And American culture is Black American culture, and it's like I almost like I understand how people don't know, because I had this conversation with somebody where they were like, there's no such thing as like Black American like slang, like vernacular English, and I was like, yes it is.
I see it in ads all over the subway.
Yeah, I was like, they and on
and all these
fleek
commercials
and all that stuff, and they were like, no, that's not Black American slang, that's internet slang. That's youth
Which
slang.
is really ridiculous, because, like, especially in New York, Black American people control the slang, and I'm going to tell you how I know that, because a lot of the slang that we use, that's common, and the way we speak, my parents who grew up in Brooklyn, not saying that they use all of it, but they either understand it or they do use some of the slang. So obviously, like, a lot of words that we say, my mom's like, yo, we used to say that back in the day.
Back in the 80s.
Right. Well, 70s.
70s.
Yeah, my mother's born in the 60s, so early 60s. So a lot of slang, like, their generation sort of, like, you know, birthed that. If you were born in the 60s, and even people from before, a lot of that slang carried itself over from the South during the Great Migration.
Yes.
A lot of people, when they think of, like, what a New Yorker sounds like, it's like this typical Italian dialect. Yeah, and you know, nobody talks like that.
Yeah.
Who's Black.
Yeah.
And you know, that's what they think all New Yorkers sound like.
Yeah.
You know, which is really interesting, because when I travel, people are like, are you really from New York?
Because you don't sound like that.
I don't sound like an Italian, which is like very weird.
But to add on to that, one day somebody tagged me on a post, and I don't follow. Somebody tagged me, and everybody know I don't follow that because it promotes the worst of us, and I think it's ran by a Nigerian person. So she put a post up one day, finna is not a word, and somebody tagged me, and I said,
they was right.
Finna is a word. It's a Black American word, and it's similar to fixin', and it comes from the South.
I'm fixin'
and
too.
My grandmother still say that. She's 80 years old. Like, you don't get it because you clearly not Black American.
Tell me that it's not a
this
word.
This is our word. This is part of our culture.
Yeah.
You know, finna is not a word. Can we please leave it in 2019? Wait, what?
And that's really ridiculous.
I'm going to forever say that
Just
word.
because you're Black and I'm Black don't mean you get to necessarily tell me that my word is canceled. Imagine me being as a Black American, like, I don't like plantains, for example. Imagine me being like, plantains are canceled. We're leaving them in 2019. I need y'all to stop eating them. We're throwing them all in the garbage. People will be mad offended.
Exactly. So I said, I don't know why you tagged me, but okay, I'm gonna say something. And I'm like, you don't know because you're not Black American, or you know, you don't have family from the South. That is a word. It's been said for generations and generations. That's how I know it. You know,
I feel it's like a universal Black word.
Yeah, like,
because, like, you hear that South, but you hear that out West. You hear that,
vinegar
in New York. Yeah, so you know, that's a part of our culture. And you know what's so interesting? Because I work at a physical therapy office, right? And I get a lot of interaction with a lot of older Black American, Southern Black patients, or just Black American.
I love talking to them.
And you know, one lady was like, "Hold on, give me a minute. I'm fixing to do something right now." And like a lot of people would not understand what she meant by that, who's not from here. But
fixing something?
Yeah. You know what I'm saying? But like, I totally got it.
Right.
Because my grandmother even spoke that way.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So when I was young, I always used to correct her. She would say things like, "You gonna broke your neck," or she would say things like, you think you know more than I is, or you think you're smarter than I is. Those were like some of the sayings that she would say, and a lot of it is just because that's how everybody spoke where she was from, and she spoke that way because that was her language, that was her dialect, and you can't take that from her because that's a Black American English vernacular that we have to start to acknowledge and accept and appreciate.
Growing up, we were taught to be ashamed of it.
I was just about to say, what do you think was like behind that urge you felt to correct her?
Because when you're 5 and 6, you're learning English. Yeah. You're learning
the Queen's English or the King's English.
Right, and you're in school, so you're like learning proper vocab, how to make a proper sentence. So at 5 or 6 years old, I don't really understand the concept of culture, but I understand what's right from wrong. So when I heard that, I'm just like, that's wrong. You don't say it that way. And then she was respond like, you think you're smarter than I is. When I would correct her when she said something else. So I didn't understand, but as I got older and got more of appreciation for my culture, I'm totally cool with people speaking that way. You should be able to speak both ways. You should be able to code switch. Because if I'm talking to somebody who's not from here, right? If I'm talking to a Hispanic person who troubles with English, if I speak that way, they don't understand me. But if I speak standard English, they'll understand me. So you're gonna have to be able to code switch and be able to speak to different people. But when we're talking amongst ourselves, it's okay to use our language and to speak our way.
I love it. It's like you get to let your hair down without people judging you.
It's dialects, and it's like something I love, for example, about like Zora Neale Hurston, who's like writer, anthropologist, was that like in a lot of her books, she like took the care to write in dialogue, like in dialect, like write her dialogue in dialect. So it's sort of like I'm gonna write it down the way that these characters would really say it. Just because it's like a book, I'm not gonna write it in like English, quote unquote. I'm gonna use these certain words, I'm gonna use these like terms, I'm gonna spell it a certain way, I'm gonna write is, like she would interview people, and the way that they would talk to her, she would write down verbatim exactly what they said. And it's funny because like at the time, Zora Neale Hurston caught like so much heat for that. Like she died kind of like in relative obscurity, like for her era, and Alice Walker actually like rediscovered a lot of her work like 30 to 40 years like after her death. And like Zora Neale Hurston kind of became famous after she was already dead because people didn't like her writing style. They felt like, she's writing in broken English, I can't read it. And like nowadays in 2019, people look at her work as like extremely like critically important because it's almost like an archive of like, oh, in this time period where she was writing this, when she was going through Mississippi, when she was going through Louisiana, when she was interviewing people, it's like a time machine. It's like a time machine. It's like a time capsule. She recorded their dialect. She recorded the way they talked and the things they said exactly the way they said it. And so now we can know. Imagine if she had like switched it up and just like wrote it in regular old English, it'd be dead. Like it would be lost, And I do feel like that's kind of something a little bit scary to think about. Us losing, we already have like lost so much.
Exactly.
So like us losing what we do have and what we have even created, like losing it or just letting it go. Just being like, oh, it's for everybody. It's not anything. It's not serious. Who cares?
But like nothing's appropriating more than what we have, and it's unfortunate because it's just like everybody can get a piece of us, but we can't even be invited to their dinner table.
Right.
You know what I'm saying?
Why do you think that is?
And when you think about like a lot of the Black Americans or Black people who were famous, a lot of them were Black Americans. So when you think about like musicians, people who were even rappers and actors and actresses,
academics, activists,
period. Like, they were pretty much pushing our culture out there, and they might have pushed it out a little bit too far, and then like it just became up for grabs. And then also we battle with like white people telling us to be proper, or that or we have to speak like them or act like them.
Right. I remember like when Prince died, there was like all these articles and like all this stuff that was like Prince transcended race, and like his music transcended race, and his music transcended culture, and his music was for everybody. And like on the one hand, I understand like art being, you know, about feelings and about emotions, and anybody, you know, anybody can listen to a song, anybody can look at a painting, you know, anybody can experience art in their own way and for themselves. But like, Prince was like unapologetically black.
Yeah,
like,
to
Prince,
say that he that's a slap in the face to his legacy.
I love Prince. I feel offended.
I feel offended right now because I didn't hear that until you just said it. That's why I rolled my eyes like, what?
And not just like, Prince was not just black. Prince was like unapologetically black. Like, Prince went up on stage and was like, you know, like books and records, Black Lives Still Matter. Like, he was very even like in your face with like, wake up, this is what's going on, black Americans, black people, you know, he's a black American from Minnesota, like, you know. And so it's just like interesting to me that people even use art and musicians and stuff like that as again like pushing like, well, it's for everyone. And it's just like, it's not for everybody.
I think maybe because we're so entertaining and we're so unique and special, like everybody looks to us as entertainment for entertainment. So you know, Prince's music, but it's not just Prince's music, because James Brown was very unapologetic about being black, and you know, he really got a movement going in the 60s.
Yeah, my grandma used to play that song all the time. Say it loud, I'm black and I'm proud.
Or even I think Pays Across to Be the Boss or something like that. Like, he had a lot of music that spoke about us uplifting ourselves. But you know, people still think of James Brown music as like everybody's music.
I sometimes feel like I'm in the Twilight Zone, to be honest, because it's like you have artists that were, especially like, let's say 60s, because people like to say, for example, that right now we're in this like new black renaissance, right? So it was kind of like in the 60s and like 70s, you had like sort of a black renaissance of like all these artists that were like really like unapologetically like black and proud and like really pushing that. And then you kind of had like another sort of golden era resurgence in like the 90s, and now people love to say that we're in one, you know, again now. And it's just very interesting to me that every time we like look back on these previous eras, the I'm a black American and proud aspect is like whited out. It's like erased out. Like, I was talking to somebody and they were talking about like all these reboots. Everybody knows like I hate the motherfucking reboots and the motherfucking sequels and this and that. I'm tired of that shit. But people were like, you know, they're talking about rebooting a lot of like old classics like Fresh Prince of Bel-Air and like Martin Show, but somebody was like, you know, a lot of the people that are talking about rebooting a lot of this stuff like are not necessarily black Americans. And this person was like, I feel like it's not gonna have that same oomph because like Martin, for example, he ad-libbed a lot of the stuff on Martin. Bad Boys 2, damn near half like of Bad Boys 2, him and Will Smith, it was just like, okay, this is the scene. Your daughter's boyfriend Reggie is coming to pick her up to take her to the prom. Right. Go. And these niggas was like, Reggie, nigga, you look about 30. Like, they was just going. Like, they was just going. And it's like, if you don't have that aspect of our specific culture, is it even the same thing? No. And it's just like when you look back in history and you have, you know, a song that's about I'm black and I'm proud, you know, and then you have somebody be like, well, but James Brown's music was for everybody. Well, I'm just gonna redo the song and I'm gonna just do whatever I want with it, and I'm just gonna like remove everything. It's not even the same. It's like it's disturbing to me. Like, I find it to be very weird, and I just don't understand what is the urge. It's like people must have this urge to like remove us.
Yeah, erase our identity.
We're like literally, I mean, especially living in New York, we're like looked down as like upon everybody. We're like the lowest, you know, like the way people view us. Maybe not, you know, economically. Like, there are a lot of black Americans who do well for themselves, who are successful, and a lot of times the ones who are successful, you're kind of looked at as, you know,
an outlier, an exception.
An exception, yeah, definitely. Yeah. But for the most of us, like the ones who are working class and stuff like that, you know, they really don't want us to like accept who we are and to accept our culture. And a lot of times they just look down on us. You know, especially when we are pro-black, when we are for our culture. You know, they don't really want us to have any sense of culture. They want us to kind of be like searching for somebody else's culture. Right. Like we don't have a home. Like again, like we're lost. And we aren't lost.
Exactly.
You know?
Yeah. I feel like I keep saying like we are home. Right? Like why can't we be home? Because I also find that when you say that, you say like, well, I am home, you know, like I'm not lost, I'm not searching, people get like offended. they feel offended when you say that. Like, no, you're not home. Like, America's not your home. Like, this is not your place, or like, this is not where you're supposed to be, and like, this is not your culture. And it's just like, well, I understand like Pan-Africanism and the point of that, and especially again like 60s, 70s, and even getting into the 80s, the importance of that. So like, not to disrespect that movement or anything like that, but I also do feel like we've been here long enough now that like we can consider this to be our home, and this is our contemporary culture, and we like built something over the course of like 500 years. It's a long ass time.
Especially if you can trace your lineage back several generations here in America, like where this is home, you know? Like I don't know nothing else, especially my ancestors didn't know anything else. Like as far back as I can go, 5 generations back have been here in America. So you know, and then the reason why at one point I was into the Pan-African thing, and no disrespect for the people who are still in that phase in life, but I've outgrown it. It's if you go there, like they're a tribal society, and it's based on where you know your tribe is from. You know, I would not be accepted there, you know? So I'm like, that's beyond me. I'm not doing that. You know, yes, America has its issues, but this is where my legacy is.
But there's no such thing as Pan-Africanism in Africa.
Right, it's only been pushed
like,
here.
When they're going through issues, it's really interesting how they look to America to kind of speak out about it. But like, you don't really, I mean, from what I see, I could be wrong, but like, you really don't see any like other countries, other African nations speaking out about what's going on in other nations. Like, they don't necessarily collectively work together to overthrow any kind of oppression. Right. You know, so like, you're not going to see Nigeria and Ethiopia working together to solve an issue. Yeah. So if there's no Pan-Africanism there, how can we have Pan-Africanism here?
Yeah. I think it's kind of, well, first thing I want to say is, it's interesting because it's like almost a double standard. People be like, well, you guys shouldn't want to claim America because like America's horrible. America is horrible. I'd be like, America's a hellhole, but it is our hellhole, right? And you have people that be like, well, like Trump and this, that, and the third, and I'd be like, Trump is the douchebag, absolutely. It's like, but like, if we look at like Nigeria, they have, which I just picked randomly, don't say I'm picking on Nigeria. Like, if you look at Nigeria, like, they have corrupt politicians, they have corrupt leaders, you know, like everywhere has corruption, corrupt leaders, corrupt politics, capitalism. That's like, we can get into it about like capitalism.
That's a whole nother video.
Right, like we can get into it about capitalism. But it's just like, there's this like weird double standard where it's like everywhere else sort of gets like a pass for those things. But like America, and all Black Americans have to be like personally responsible for like corrupt leaders and corrupt this and corrupt that. And I also feel like people don't, and I've said this before too, people don't take into account that it's almost like there's two Americas. There's white America, there's Black America. Like Black Americans overwhelmingly didn't even motherfucking vote for Trump. So it's like, that don't gotta be our mess to clean up.
But because we're American, we're like lumped in this whole entire American, like in this American society, like we are all
Western
like
imperialism and all that.
Which is really interesting because a lot of times with people who aren't from here, they think like, also we have some of the same values as white Americans, which is just completely the opposite. Like the way we raise our children, a lot of people would say, you know, your mama probably made your bed, or your mama, you know, cleaned your room. Like I've heard people say these things, or your mama,
because you're American,
right? Your mom, she didn't beat you, right? Or your mom didn't discipline you. And which is really ridiculous because my mom did discipline us. And
Black American moms.
And my mom was really, really strict. You know, a lot of times people think that we can just, you know, speak to our parents in any kind of way, which is just like not our reality. So even from a cultural perspective, like I've heard people even say we don't season our food. Like Black Americans don't season our food. And when you think about and when you think about how much American cuisine, like when people come to America, they want to try a lot of soul food. They want to try, or they go to restaurants that have either been influenced, or restaurants take a lot of like cooks recipes and stuff like that who are Black, so they take a lot of our cultural foods and they put it in their like high class restaurants, and they want to eat there. And you know, it's really interesting to hear people say like they kind of put this white stereotype on us. So like again, not seasoning food, I've heard, or not washing food, or not preparing it correctly, or just not having any any real morals or values at home.
Yeah.
That is why I feel that it is very important for people, especially people with children or who have nieces and nephews or little cousins. It's very important that we pass along our culture and let them know that you do have a culture, and we have to, it's our job, we're the new elders, we have to be the ones to educate the youth so they don't feel lost, because at one point, not that I was searching, but I was trying different, like I mentioned, I tried Pamphlet, and then I was like, that's not for me, this is, so to prevent a youngster from growing up feeling like they don't have a culture, it's our duty as the elders to educate them and to use our life or our platforms like what Serena's doing. And like, I'm into health education, so I'm being a positive example in that, like looking like this, showing up to help people and educating the youth, because they are our future, and they should not feel like we do not have a culture. We do have culture. They should not feel lost, because this is our home, and it should be known. It's really sad to know that there are little children out there feeling like the only history we have is what's being taught in the public school system, and that is not the case. It's your job as a parent to educate your kid at home and to let them know what they're going to face going into the public school system. My grandmother did that for me. She told me Christopher Columbus didn't discover shit, but when you go to school, you gotta say yes so you can pass the grade and graduate. People need to do that with their kids. You can't just send them in with as a blank slate to the schools and think they're gonna learn their true history. Yeah. So
what's interesting?
That's my.
When I was growing up, I never felt like America was my home. Although we are from here, although we are U.S. citizens and we can trace our citizenship back into the 1800s, I just always felt like this has never been our home. Because we were never accepted here. But there's nowhere else to send us back to. So I think we need to, one, take ownership of the country that we did build, because a lot of times we don't even realize what we built.
That's what I'm saying, even the physical infrastructure.
So when you realize, as you get older, when you realize we really built this country,
not just figuratively, literally.
So I think it's so disrespectful to you can sit in the class, because I went to your college in Queens, and it's very diverse, and then you'll hear people say, this country's built by immigrants, and I'm just like, it was built before you got here.
This
and then everybody
was built
looks
by
at
slaves.
me like I'm crazy.
But they call you xenophobic. They say you don't like immigrants, and it's like,
that's not the case. You have to
and you be like, it's not that I don't it's not that I don't like immigrants.
And I'm very welcoming, because I come from a welcoming family, so anybody can have a seat at my dinner table and have some food and have something to drink, and we're very welcoming people, because that's how people down south are. So when you think about, a lot of people think New Yorkers are rude. Black American people are not rude.
We're the most welcoming people
We're
ever.
so welcoming, but at the end of the day, we have to take ownership of what we've done here, and the contributions we've made to this country in ways. Even when you think about Memorial Day.
What was that?
That was my phone.
Oh, okay. It's all right.
Even about Memorial Day, that was started by Black American people in Charleston, South Carolina.
It sure was.
And that's a holiday that everybody, and we wanted to honor our soldiers that passed away who fought in the war.
Let me be specific. Memorial Day started by Black Americans honoring our fallen Black Union soldiers that died and were left out in the street, bodies. Sounds familiar. So I don't want to hear nothing about nothing. That's what I'm saying. Holidays, physical infrastructure, figurative infrastructure, economy, all that stuff was already built.
And even when we think about holistic treatment, your grandmother or any elder in your family has so many remedies for you when you get sick, because those natural remedies didn't work. And a lot of times we were curing our oppressor, we were curing our slave master from a lot of diseases and illnesses. So even when it comes to science, technology,
go get Clara from out the field.
So and when it comes to health, technology, we were literally pioneers in every aspect that you can think about that we're known for.
And regarding health, that's my life purpose. And I got a lot of my information from my grandmother. She was a healer as well. And yes, I took the route to go to school for health education and promotion. but I like holistic health, and I remember my grandmother always having like a herb or this, or she always had something to fix something, and I gravitated towards that. And you know, I feel like I'm following in her footsteps in a way. And so when you said that, that's why my face lit up. I'm like, yes, I'm passionate about health and wellness. And you know, our people are great in so many lanes. Like there's scientists, there's healers, there's educators, there's journalists. Like we do a lot, you know.
And it's funny to me, what I find like the most interesting thing about Black Americans, and what is like our signature strength, is like our ability to adapt, our ability to sort of make something out of nothing, our ability to change things. Like you had things that, for example, like you were just saying, like holistic remedies and homeopathy that like came over from Africa, but then you had like people that went to like different parts of the United States. So they were living in different climates, they had different types of plants, they had different types of ailments, and so it was like, again, like it was like we just became something new over time. We became like our own ethnicity over time, we became our own culture over time. We took the old and we really changed it. We what is the word, metamorphosized it, you know, into something new. Like there is like a foundation, but like we took a little bit of this and a little bit of that. It's like even just our own culture is like a melting pot,
right?
Where we have like took all these different influences and things from like indigenous Americans went in the pot, and you know, all this different stuff where we like built it up into something new. And that's across the board, across industry, like across everything. We have this like adaptability of like, you put me anywhere and I'm gonna just make it work. I'm gonna figure it out. And that's something I love about us. And it's funny because I feel like it's almost like that's the thing that people don't like about us, is that they say like, oh, y'all don't have anything, y'all don't necessarily have like roots, or everything is new, or everything's always changing, like the history. Because you have some people, you know, that they might have 1,000 years, or you know, of like what they feel like is roots, and then they feel like ours is like,
really? Do you know anybody who has 1,000 years of roots?
I personally don't.
And then when you think about somebody who
maybe like Greeks and Romans, maybe I don't know any of them though.
Right. I mean, even Africans, their culture has been affected tremendously by colonization, and a lot of their culture has been wiped out.
Yes.
So even like, I don't know anybody who can trace their family on paper back 500 years ago.
Yeah.
Like that's something that's really difficult to do. But you know what's really interesting, when people ask me where I'm from, like you asked the wrong Black American where they're from, because I will tell you my lineage, and then like I'll ask in return, where's your people from, and tell me a like a family story,
right?
Or paint a picture for me so I know what your experience is like. Oh, I just know my grandmother,
right?
And you know, and these are people who were where slavery has been abolished a lot more years sooner before that we had our we've had our freedom.
Yeah. Or
these are people who even come from other countries who weren't enslaved, and they don't even have an idea of like, you know, where their family is from. You know, we speak to a lot of Hispanics, they're like, I'm Spanish.
Yeah. Because
they speak Spanish, but I speak English, and I don't walk around saying I'm British. You know, which is really ridiculous.
Right.
And, like, even like if
Spanish
a lot of them,
is a colonizer language.
Right.
Portuguese is a colonizer language.
They'll say like
French.
And they're the main ones saying that we don't have culture too.
Yeah.
And it's just like, I mean, what about you? Like a lot of the holes that are missing in our culture are some of the holes that are in your culture. For some reason, they don't necessarily see it that way.
That just goes back to the double standard. It goes back to the double standard. But I also wanted to say, this is going to be like a little bit of a reverse back. I also wanted to say that I think a lot of people don't also understand, in terms of like holding on to like culture and legacy, in terms of like land ownership. I think that a lot of people don't understand how difficult that can be too, being in situations, because like I know a lot of people in DC is kind of like an interesting space in terms of like culture. DC has like a really unique culture, especially because until very recently it was a majority like Black, not like majority minority, like a majority Black
Chocolate city.
And like Black people in all these like positions of power and leadership positions, and homeowners and business owners, and you know, like a working class, a middle class, an upper class, all these different types of Black people. And now you have a lot of people that are trying to figure out like what to do with like their land that they own, their property, their homes, because you have like this rapid like gentrification coming in, and sending the property values up, and you have people that maybe they grant, like y'all were talking about elders like dying and like not passing on, you know, the importance of the legacy and the lineage. So you have people that are dying, and then you have kids that's like, well, I don't even want to live in DC, and I don't even care about this house, like I don't even care about this property. If I sell it, I could sell it for $1 million. Some white person gonna pay me $1 million for it and give me money for it, or you know, it's 5 of us kids, we can't all have the house, so we have to sell it, split the money, you know, like all these, and just like all these different types of things, and trying to figure out how do we balance wanting to hold on to our legacy and hold on to our culture, and also how do we fight against this like constant like tide wave of like pushing on us.
I think financial literacy is very important, because even if you don't, okay, like the example you gave, 5 siblings, 1 house, if they rent it out, you know, and then they could, the rent can maintain the property, and if there's excess, like they can split it some type of way to keep it in the family, because here in America, that's what counts. Land is everything, and you know, teaching that to your children, financial literacy, like different ways you can make money off real estate. You could do Airbnb. You know, if you don't want tenants, cool. You could do Airbnb for the each floor or something, but don't give it up, because it's very interesting that you brought that up, because one day I was on the subway speaking with the plumber, and there was a brownstone in Harlem that he said, I'm working on this, but I'm crying because the woman who owned it, she died, but her children all moved down south, and they want to sell it for 1.8 million, but they don't know how much more it's going to be worth once the ink dry, like before the ink dry, like. Yeah. And he said, I wish our people wouldn't do that. Like it doesn't make sense that they're letting this go, you know. So I think financial literacy is the key. And because even if your children, because everybody's individuals, even if they weren't successful in life, like having a career or whatever, if you keep the property and you make money off it real estate wise, that's still keeping it in the family. I think that would be a good remedy for it, because that way you won't be tempted to sell it like, oh, I'm broke, like, oh, $1 million, ooh.
Yeah.
You know, so that's my 2 cents.
I think we've just been deprived of so much wealth, of so much land. Like we never got our 40 acres and a mule.
Never.
So if we have 10 acres and you know, we have to kind of split it between a lot of people, that creates friction.
Right.
And then also, like we don't live for generations to come.
Right.
I don't think we ever really been given an opportunity to live for generations to come.
Right. Yeah.
Because we haven't been able to say, you know what, like, son, just do you. Like, I mean, I'm pretty sure like now we can do that. Like we're starting to be able to say, hey, go to school and I'll fund you to go to school and you can live at home and stuff like that. But back in the day, we didn't have that opportunity to just, for most black people didn't have that opportunity. So we couldn't just pass on wealth or land. And that created more of like a selfish mindset, or we're
like
not as, and we're not as patient. So we don't want to see things grow. We want it now because we've just been deprived of so much wealth. So if you take, you know, somebody who has $0 in their pocket and you offer them $5, but if you can offer that person maybe $30 at the end of the month, which one would you take?
Right.
You know, so at the end of the day, you're gonna just go for the $5. You're not thinking for generations.
And they say that that's like how the cycle of poverty is perpetuated, right? It's like if your gas tank fills up with $20, right? You could put $20 in it, or if you don't have that $20, you just get like, if you get only 5 every day, you're gonna put 5 every day to get to where you're going and get back. 5 every day, get to where you're going to get. But if you're putting 5 every day, at the end of the week, you spent more. Like you've spent more than that 20, right? You spent $35 because instead of just filling up with the 20, but you didn't have the 20, you only have 5. And that's how like people stay in a cycle of poverty. So I'm gonna use that to segue into one more thing, and then we'll wrap up.
Okay.
How do you guys feel about reparations?
Oh, thank God we got a chance to
We
talk.
got to talk about reparations.
I am totally for reparations.
Hot topic right now.
Yes, it is.
I am totally for reparations. The only unfortunate thing about is that a lot of people who are speaking or who are being chosen to speak about reparations are not from here.
Are not Black Americans,
So-
not descendants of American child
Which
slavery.
is ridiculous because some of them feel like we don't need it,
Yeah.
or some feel like they're entitled to it. Like I was having a conversation with a patient, and he was talking about reparations, and he says, you know, who deserves it, or who's going to get it? And I mean, what do you mean? The descendants
Yes.
of Black Americans,
American
Or
chattel
the
slavery.
descendant- or the descendants of slaves in America are only entitled to reparations.
Yes.
But then, you know, to him it's like, well, I'm Black too, and you know, I'm from here, even though his parents aren't from here, but he's from here.
I feel like that's so disingenuous.
It is, and it's. He's not disconnected to Black American culture at all because he grew up in Bed-Stuy and he was born in the 50s, and you know, at that time it was like you kind of assimilated to Black American culture. So he feels more like this feels like his home as well. But at the end of the day, I don't know if they are cognizant that, like, listen, your ancestors didn't build this country, right?
You
know?
came here,
Right,
and that's
you
fine.
came
You're
here
a proud
voluntarily,
immigrant, right?
yeah.
Like you voluntarily came
Yeah.
here to get ahead. How do you feel about it, Nia?
Okay.
You can say how you feel. We all friends here.
I am. I'm just saying, oh, where should I start? Okay. So I feel like on the case of reparations, I don't like when people who oppose it say, you know, well, you didn't do it, you didn't live through that. And my rebuttal to that always is, for comparison with Holocaust survivors and their descendants, you know, when they receive their funds for that, nobody told them no, you know. So why do we have to be told no? Especially people we legit can trace our lineage back several generations here. So it's beyond a shadow of a doubt. Like, we are the descendants of the strong ones. Like, our ancestors, despite everything they went through, they found a way, and that's why we're sitting here today.
Right.
And I feel like it's something that's long overdue. Some people say we already get it in the form of these social welfare, like for housing, Section 8, and public assistance. But that's for everybody. You know, it doesn't discriminate.
Black Americans aren't even the #1 recipients
Exactly.
of social welfare. It's white women.
Yes, and plus we're only like 12% of the population.
Right.
So for it to be a whole issue that it's too much money or something, I feel like it's a poor excuse. And I feel like I'm for it if you can, you know, you can prove your lineage.
Right.
I feel like it should be a criteria, and because I'm that type of person, I'm all about order and stuff. It should be a criteria, and if you meet the criteria, then yes.
If you can trace it, like, listen, anybody can go on Ancestry.com and just look up a census.
Yes.
There are records of U.S. citizens
Yes.
who are Black, right, who were born in the 1870s, 1890s.
Yes.
And many of them can like, they've had parents too. Many slaves did live into the 1900s as well.
Yes.
So a
Slavery
lot of
wasn't
people,
that long ago.
It really wasn't that long ago. You know, we can use the census and we can figure out who is owed reparations and who is not.
I filmed a video. It hasn't gone up yet. By the time this goes up, it will be up. I filmed a video actually on tracing lineage and genealogy for Black Americans, descendants of American chattel slavery. And in some of the reading I was doing for the video, they actually talk about how the first American census after the end of slavery was, I believe, in 1867. And so they saw a population jump because it was like prior to that, you had people that were not considered
people,
humans, part of the population, and now they are. So it's like just from that alone, if you could trace back to 1867, like, you can tell. And then they were also talking about how, like, even prior to that, it's hurtful to say and to think about, but even prior to that, you keep logs of your property, right? Like, if you drive a car, you have documentation of your car, you have documentation of where you live, you have documentation of your furniture, you have documentation of everything that you buy and sell. You have a receipt, you have a log, right? When I was in Memphis, Tennessee, I went to the Slave Haven Museum, which is a historical museum they have there. And something that I learned there that I've talked about previously was that Aetna, for example, the insurance company Aetna, it was founded as an insurance company to insure slaves and to insure slave ships. So that because so many people died on the Middle Passage coming over here, or ships that sank in storms or got lost or just never made it, that
they still got paid.
Slave owners they were losing property. So they were like, I need a way to insure my slaves, my property. I need a way to insure my ships so that if I don't receive it, I still get my money. And that's how Aetna, which is still around today, insurance company. Yeah. You want to talk about shit that we have built, right? That's how Aetna got started. So that means that there's insurance logs.
Exactly.
There's logs of everything. Like even prior to the census, which jumped in 1867, there's all types of property logs, insurance logs. There you did have black people, slaves that ran away, that enlisted in the Union Army. So you have army logs. You have medical records.
I mean, we fought in every war.
Right. You have army logs. You have medical records. Like we know the name of Crispus Attucks, who was a black American, the very first person to die in the Revolutionary War. We know his name, right?
Yeah.
So I find this to be very disingenuous again. Number one, obviously we're owed reparations.
Yes.
I don't understand what's all this debate
beyond a shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, over like do we or don't we. So I'm not even gonna get into that. Like obviously we deserve reparations. We literally built this country in every sense of the word. Not to shit on anybody else, but we did. And if we start getting into this conversation of like, well, how will we know, and who gets it and who doesn't get it, and it's like we can trace lineage.
Case for that.
Yeah, like we can very easily trace lineage. If you can trace your lineage, now whatever the criteria is going to be, like you have to be able to trace your lineage on both sides, or you know, if it's if you're half Black American, half something else, you get half. You know, whatever that criteria could be like worked out. But I definitely I'm watching some of these conversations, like people are just lying, like they're being so dishonest, they're acting like it's so difficult to like, how are we going to figure it out, and everybody was oppressed, so how can we say that Black America,
not like, in the way we were.
No,
right.
Not everybody was enslaved in America.
You came here voluntarily, you came here essentially not to be oppressed, but you knew or at some point figured it out, like the system that we live in.
Yeah.
So
they call America the land of opportunity. So if you came here for an opportunity.
A lot of the opportunities they got, we fucking died for.
Right.
You
like,
excuse my language, but we died.
Oh, curse, go. Like
we died for a lot of those opportunities, and everybody can come here, and I'm talking about even white European immigrants.
Yes.
They've came here and they benefited from a lot of the things that we've died for.
Working towards whiteness.
Right.
Look, read the book, y'all.
Right.
Read the book.
Exactly.
Because the Irish weren't even originally considered white, and then they were like, yes, we are white.
They pit them against black Americans.
They were like, we are white. We're not niggers. And then the other white people was like, you're right.
And that's why they treat us so good.
Right. Yeah. It's ridiculous to me
but even them, they were given like they were given things to make them whole, to make them like a true American.
Yes.
And we
still have not to this day received anything.
Right.
And it's absolutely, I believe, possible. It's absolutely possible to trace lineage and figure out who gets what. And we have such a huge, like, we have all these companies, Apple and Amazon and all these companies. We talk about like a rich people tax, like a 1% tax on some of these billionaires would give us more than enough funds.
Exactly.
I don't care. I don't want to hear it. I don't want to hear about, well, how will we know? We can trace people's lineage, absolutely. And I don't want to hear about how, like, well, I'm black too. But you know that you're not a descendant of Americans.
Take that up with France. Take that up with Spain, and take that up with the UK.
Take that up with your colonizer.
Right.
I applaud you. Go take it up with your colonizer.
And that's what regarding that. Like whenever I go somewhere, I volunteer a lot in community health organizations, and people who are not Black American, whether they're Caucasian or Jewish, they ask me, "Where are you from?" And I'm like, "Here." No, but where? Here. America.
Yeah.
Just give them a history.
Where specifically? Okay, all right. So my mother was born in D.C., but my grandmother was from South Carolina. She had moved to D.C. because she wanted to, be closer to a big city. But my father's side is from Alabama, and And they're like, "Oh, okay." I said, "Why? Why can't you just be content with me saying that I'm a Black American?" I feel like I always have to explain to somebody like where my lineage is from, and that's the thing. Like I said, they expected us to disappear and be gone, but we still here because we're resilient. We are descendants of the strong ones, resilient people. You know, they made a way out of no way, and that's why we're here today.
And I think that's a wrap.
Boom.
Boom.